Awesome.
Hello.
Good to see you, Alex. I was panicking a bit there.
Yeah, good to see you as well. Cool, and I think we've got Liam joining now as well.
I am indeed. I'm all joined.
Good man. Good man.
Cool. So I think my background's backwards, but
No, it's front way around for us.
is it? Oh, okay, cool.
Better background than mine.
I quite like your one actually.
This is how we used to do it in the good old days before we had digital desktops.
Put your big banner in the background.
Yeah.
I see that we're on the Leeds United grounds now.
Yeah, we have been all year. It's pity.
Oh, cool.
Pity there hasn't been anybody there to watch it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good point actually.
Just going to give it a minute, guys, before to let a few people catch up. We'll crack on. Get any snow this morning, Alex?
Loads. Our road hasn't been gritted at all either, so it's really, really dangerous, which is great. But
yeah. Well, I plan to be at home doing this, but the internet connection at my house is unusable. I've got 3 teenagers, a wife.
Oh yeah.
Everyone on the streets using the internet. It's just incredibly slow. So
yeah.
Brave the elements.
Should get Gav or Andrew to help you set up some port forwarding so that you can restrict the bandwidth that they get and give yourself more bandwidth.
Yeah, that sounds seriously technical, but I like the idea.
Yeah, a bit of quality of service, just.
I think that's what Stu did to his partner. Slows the internet down.
Right, guys. So I think we're about ready to get going. Shall we start?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay. Well, welcome to the Pentest Crowd webinar. I'm Robin, one of the co-founders. I have with me today Liam and Alex from the pen testing team. If you want to give everyone a wave, come on. We are the Pentest Crowd for today. I didn't really want to start with an apology, but I'm going to have to do because Dave Benson, our resident social engineer, was hoping to attend. He was hoping to do a pitch on social engineering. He was looking forward to it. Unfortunately, he was tested positive for COVID last weekend. He's okay, but he's not feeling so good, so he's had to duck out, unfortunately. So he promised he's going to attend the April event, and I just wanted to wish him a speedy recovery. If we're looking at timing, we reckon it's going to be about 30-40 minutes. It does depend on questions, but if you're not able to stay for the duration, don't panic. We are recording the event and we'll be distributing the content out via our various marketing channels next week. So welcome to the webinar. I mean, as you can probably tell, it's designed to be pretty informal. There's no PowerPoints, there's no staged marketing presentations. The original idea was just really to give customers a chance to speak to the testing team. And then we expanded that out to non-customers and to a wider community, and it's exceeded my expectations. And the whole purpose really is to provide insightful information. And in order to do that, we kind of need questions. So I don't care how simple the question is or how complex it is. Send us the question. If you just use the Q&A button at the bottom, that's how you'd submit a question. You might be worried about something. You might have a project that you're planning or a project that's on your mind. Or you might just be interested in something. Just fire the question in and we'll certainly do our best to answer the question. If we can't, due to time, we will distribute all questions and answers following the event. And also I was going to ask as well, just around topics. We're planning our next event, which will be April. We have an idea what we think we want to talk about, but really I'd want that to be driven by the audience. So if you have an idea for topics, anything you'd like us to discuss as a team, then use the Q&A, fire it across there, or if you can't do that, or you think of something at a later point, just drop us an email, info@pentestpeople.com, and if you just put in the subject Pentest Crowd, we'll be able to pick that up and put that into the plan. Great. So in terms of the order of play, Liam's going to start. Liam is one of our younger members of our team, but don't let that fool you. He's a bit of a weapon, and his specialist subject is the sources that he uses, the processes he goes through. He's got some interesting stories, and we're going to follow that with a question and answer session. So if you have any questions for Liam, just submit them via the button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to cover off those questions. Then Alex will be taking over. Alex is one of our team leaders. His specialist area is web application testing. So Alex is going to be walking us through a bit of history, most common attacks, things he sees out in the wild. And he's going to have a brief look at the OWASP top 10 and how that might apply to yourself. And then again, we'll follow that with a question and answer session. And then just to close things off, we did do a survey before the event asking for questions. And what we've done is we've summarized them into a small handful. And we're going to try and work through those questions at the back end as a team and just kind of brainstorm those, and then we'll close. So I hope that's all right. So with no further ado, Liam, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin. Right, the wonderful Alex that's following on from me will be telling you all about the scary things that you can do with web application and all the hacking shenanigans that he's been getting up to. The equally wonderful Dave, who we all wish a speedy recovery to, would have been telling you all about the human threat. That's phishing, picking locks, kicking indoors, maybe not the last one, and all that good fun stuff. Both of these vectors are very worrying. But the single most scary thing in the world of hacking is open source intelligence. And there's no real argument about that, although Alex is going to disagree with me in about 10 minutes. OSINT doesn't leverage cool attack scripts. It's not picking locks. All it needs at a very basic level is a browser and a couple of hours. So I'll be giving you a little bit of a breakdown of what it is first, and then we've got loads of cool little stories which show you all the different elements and all the different forms it takes. So first off, OSINT, open source intelligence, is anything that's not protected by some kind of password or behind some kind of paywall. As long as you don't have to break in anywhere to get it, you can just do it by clicking around, then it's open source intelligence. Effectively, when we're using it in tests, we're using it a couple of different ways. The primary way is in most of our standard engagements, so external infrastructure assessments, web applications, internal, things like that. We run a tool called Athena, which was developed in-house. You pass it a domain, it goes off, runs around the internet and sees if it can find any leaked credentials. If it does, then you get them all back and you can start firing them at things. Which brings us on, this is an attack called credential stuffing, which is kind of one of the most damaging attack vectors with kind of OSINT. There's no point in trying to use all this kind of intelligence that you gain to use phishing or physical intrusion as if you just get the keys to the kingdom straight away. Then you're already in, and you can cut out the middleman and you don't have to call anybody. A kind of good example of this is I was involved in a web application assessment. I'll try not to take too much away from Alex's talk here. A number of months ago, it was a web application assessment with a bit of cloud infrastructure built into it. So they had kind of SharePoint and things like that set up. Again, ran the Athena script, came back with about 60, 70 emails, which is pretty standard for a decent sized organization that they were. And then little known fact about Azure is there's an API endpoint that you can run just send requests to, little post requests to, and it'll tell you if an email address is registered in all of Azure. So if the account exists in any tenancy, then it'll tell you that you're doing that. So ran the little script, whipped up a little script in Ruby, fired them all through there, still had some hits. It's great news for us. Then about, before 10 a.m., started at 9. Before 10 a.m., I'd already broken into 3 or 4 different accounts. I was reading through all their SharePoint. I had loads of information available to me. And that's the power of credential stuffing. That's the power of OSINT. There's some other forms that OSINT takes as well, where sometimes we're not just going after kind of breaching things. Sometimes you do want to do phishing because breaking into an account is great, but if you're looking for kind of financial data or things like that, breaking into somebody's email address, it might get you that, but then again it might not. And so you'd have to then start using this to facilitate phishing. Before I was involved with Pentest People, I did a bit of freelance work for a charity here in Leeds, which was an OSINT investigation. They wanted to know that if I was just given, and I was literally just given the web URL of of the charity, how much damage could I have done? So I didn't know anything else about it. That was it. Couple of hours later, and I just used a browser for this, I had a full list of all the board members, all the trustees, and enough information about a number of the kind of groups that they'd set up and were involved with to launch sophisticated phishing attacks against them. Again, that scared them a little bit, but then again, they could use that and use it to inform certain social media policies and other things like that. This is the other form that OSINT takes, right? So we have the passwords and then we have all the data, and things like social media profiles are gold mines when we're doing these sorts of assessments. If you're looking for information on a company, chances are somebody in their marketing team will have put it out there because it makes them look great, and that's awesome. And we do, and again, a bit of nuance comes in here of how much information can we put out because we still need to promote ourselves versus what information should we probably be keeping under our hat because it makes my job, or a person like me who maybe is being a bit more nefarious, their job a lot easier as well. So went through all the social media profiles, grabbed all that data, packaged it off in a nice report. They were very happy. Another thing that it can do is it can help provide better context for phishing engagements. So that's voice phishing. So instead of just sending an email to somebody or calling up and saying, "Hi, I'm Bob from your IT department. What can I do here? Can you give me all your sensitive information?" Which most people, it'll have been covered in their standard phishing training that they'll be given. Most companies give when people join companies. They'll say absolutely not. Go away, I'm not giving you all this data, and then you've wasted 5 minutes of your life, you haven't gotten anywhere. A little bit of OSINT can really help kind of smooth the process out, smooth these assessments out. So there's a little website called relationshipscience.com. It's not a dating site. It plots relationships between employees and companies. So if you're given a target or you find one using kind of other forms of OSINT, like the social media that I was talking about with the OSINT investigation for the charity, you can plug the name in there and it'll start giving them people that they might work with. So it will plot that based off, maybe you say you work in the same department on LinkedIn, so you probably know one another. And then the phishing assessment I was involved with, all I did was I just said, "Oh, by the way, I know your mate, Tom Smith. He's passed me your details. Could you give me some more information about this?" And I managed to get quite a lot of information about that just using a very little bit of OSINT. There are a few other kind of scary examples, or not scary examples, but things that really demonstrate to people that perhaps aren't as technical. So again, using some of these OSINT techniques, just before Christmas, I was sat with some of my colleagues, socially distanced in the office. We were having a bit of a meeting. And somebody decides to give me their email address of the Netflix account they used, because it was kind of, we'd all wrapped up work for the day. It was about 5:30. We wanted to watch a little film. Obviously, we couldn't do Christmas parties and things like that. So the three of us sat down. Using they gave me the email address. I kind of typed in, logged in, and while I was doing it, I just had a little cheeky look online, see if I could do anything for all that. And they were very surprised when I read out the full name and some other personal information to them about the owner of the account, which wasn't them. It was, who uses their own Netflix account these days anyway. And that, all of these kind of different stories should help to illustrate that if the data is out there, we're going to find it. So, it might be buried deep in some, repository on GitHub. It might be, kind of on the front page of your website. It doesn't matter where it is. We know where to look. People who know how to do these OSINT assessments know where to look. They will find this information. And this avenue of attack, it is used in all our engagements. We'd run the Athena tool before all of our engagements. We do a little bit of OSINT. If, web app tests are coming up really dry, or infrastructure tests, external infrastructure tests are coming up really dry, we can't really find a lot of security vulnerabilities, start looking at GitHub, start trawling social media, see if there's anything out there that you could pull off and use to help facilitate attack or paint a better picture for a client. Hopefully that's kind of shown you why OSINT is the scary side. And now I think that's all the stories I've got. I think we've got a couple of questions there.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine, Liam. Fascinating stuff, really insightful and frightening at the same time. So we've had a few questions in, Liam. Hopefully they won't catch you out, these. So first one's from Graham. Quite a good question, actually. Is it legal?
Yes, the point of OSINT is that it is legal. And this is kind of almost a common misconception. There is all of the stuff that we're doing is legal because we're not breaking in anything. It's not like we're kind of breaking into an application, stealing database data. You've already put it out there. It's like you've kind of broadcast it to the world, and we're just kind of listening into the broadcast.
Right, good stuff. Elliot's asked a question. You sort of mentioned a tool, Athena, but in the presentation, Liam, he's just asked, what tools do you use, or what tools can someone use to do sort of?
Well, it really depends on kind of what you're going for. Athena is a decent one. That's one we've developed in-house. And obviously, I'm going to recommend that one to all those people out there. Most of the time, it's mainly a browser. You Google dorking, if people know what that is, it's just kind of, there's very specific ways you can interrogate Google. It's a very smart search engine, so you can find a lot of information like that. Things like Sublister is another good one because it gives subdomains. So you put Pentest people in there, it pulls up all the different ones for your secure portal and things like that. And if there's any sensitive information on some of those, sometimes people forget about them. I think the craziest one I've seen was 40,000 subdomains. And so one of those is bound to have some information on them. There's also the Harvester, which gets you basic, generic email information, things like that. And then DNS Recon does kind of the same thing as Sublister, and Relationship Science, which I was talking about previously with the vishing assessment.
Good stuff, Liam. Sorry for rushing you through. We've got a lot of questions here, that's all, and we've got to get through and so on. But so Jack's asked a question, what is the most common data that you would find during an OSINT investigation?
Again, it really depends on what you're looking for, kind of depends on the data you get. We always find email addresses for people, so we've always got the format of the email address. There's loads of different ways we can do that. I mean, the primary one is like free open source tools like the Harvester. When we're running Athena, normally we'll get creds as well. Most of the time these won't work, but sometimes they will. Depends on kind of what the password culture is like, both at the company and the people who are using these addresses. So I think the most common data point we'd always find is an email address, I guess.
Right, good stuff. So interestingly then, Liam, so I've got a question here from Ethan, cool name by the way, Ethan. Using the OSINT information, what type of attack would you typically leverage using this information that you've collected?
So first one, I keep going on about it, is cred stuffing. There's no point doing anything else if you've immediately gotten into whatever you're trying to attack. The second one is it helps with vishing massively, just building like more realistic pretexts. You're no longer calling somebody up and flying blind. You're calling somebody up, the company they work for, a lot of information about them, which office they're in, who their boss is, who their line manager is, who the CEO is. You can build a more holistic picture when you're doing things like that. So it would leverage, your kind of standard phishing engagements. And then the last one would be physical intrusion. Another real world example for this, one of our some of our consultants, it wasn't me on this assessment, some of our consultants were involved in a physical intrusion test while they're trying to break in somewhere, and they managed to find on somebody's Instagram profile a key card that they'd taken a photograph of their desk saying, look at my cable management or something like that, and in the corner was that key card, which we were able to replicate, and that aided in the physical intrusion side of things.
Awesome. Liam, I wrote down cred stuffing. What does that mean?
So cred stuffing, credential stuffing is if you use a password on, say, let's take LinkedIn when it got breached back in 2014, I think. If you use a password on LinkedIn and then you use the same one for your Gmail, if I see that you've used it on LinkedIn and then I take that and kind of stuff it into Gmail and it works on there, that would be a credential stuffing attack. So it's effectively just leveraging the fact that people have reused passwords.
Got you. So we've got plenty of questions here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to just rattle this down to two. Mike's asked, given that we're on social media, what can we all do to make life difficult for hackers?
If you apply the principle that if you wouldn't put it on a poster in your front window, don't put it online, that covers off a lot of stuff. If you're not comfortable with random people on the internet seeing it, random people on your street seeing it, you shouldn't be comfortable with random people on the internet seeing it. And don't use Facebook's like check into this place service, please. Just don't do that. That's a really bad idea. for a number of reasons.
Chris has asked, are there any training courses that you can go on? Any training courses you can go on to become a practitioner, or could a company send staff on an OSINT training course, awareness course?
I'm sure they exist out there. The best way to do it is, I was very fortunate that I could get a little bit of kind of volunteering experience doing it, but just start, pick a target, find out as much information about them as you can, and then once you're done, wipe it down, keep going. There is a book out there. Unfortunately, the name escapes me right now, but I think we're doing a follow-up email, so I'll be sure to throw the title of that in there. That's really good. That helped me quite a lot.
Good stuff. Quickly, Hamzi's asked, are there any tools that we can use to check our data exposure on the web?
The Harvester, Sublister, just Google your company, click on the first 5 links and see what it says. It doesn't, if you want a kind of really in-depth look, you're probably going to want somebody who's got a little bit more experience. A lot of these there's no strict science to Google dorking. It's a kind of delicate tool that needs to be, you need to know how to wield it. But yeah, just having a basic Google is a good start.
All right, Liam, I'm going to have to wrap things up. So just really quickly, one bit of advice to the audience, if you have it, hopefully it's for free, that can give a maximum impact.
Again, just if you wouldn't put it on a poster on your front window, don't put it online.
Good stuff. And just finally, I've just written this down just about you really, Liam. I was just trying to get an insight into yourself. You're a pen tester. Why do you do it? What's the buzz?
It's solving problems all day. You're given a puzzle, and once you solve the puzzle, that gives you a new puzzle. And I love solving puzzles. I get myself in quite a lot of trouble, or I have done in the past when I get bored. And this job is never ever boring.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, thanks for that, Liam. That was really interesting. Thanks, mate. So we're going to move now on to Alex. If you're ready, sir, over to you.
Oh, hi everyone. So firstly, thank you for coming. We are really excited about doing the Pentest Crowd and having a sort of opportunity for us as consultants to leave our basement and interact with you a little bit and, just understand what you're looking for and what you're after so that we can try and tailor our presentations in the future, as Robin said. So I'm Alex. I'm a managing consultant at Pentest People. I look after application security. This is anything from web applications to APIs to mobiles. Today, we're going to be taking a bit of a look at the web application threat landscape and just some stories surrounding it that hopefully you'll be able to learn some lessons from. So to start off with, the first web application was released by Tim Berners-Lee in August of 1991. At this point, it was a website as opposed to a web application. And by that, I mean that a website is a static brochureware application that is just used to display static text to users. It is not a functional website that allows logins or any kind of sort of deeper functionality behind it. As we moved further on with web applications, as we came through time, we realized that we needed them to store really sensitive data. We needed to be able to differentiate between people so that we're not showing certain bits of data to the wrong user, for example, your bank statements or your credit statements. So web applications pretty much all run on a protocol called HTTP, which is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is a two-way protocol, and all it really does is send data from a browser to a server, and then the server sends data back from the server to the browser. So we split this into two different areas known as client-side and server-side. Client-side is any processing that is happening directly on your browser, and server-side is any processing that is happening directly on the server. Now, the difference between this is really important to know, especially for your developers, as we'll get into a bit more detail later. So as web applications grew, we had the introduction of what we call stateful technologies, the ability to track who a user is whilst they're on your computer, whilst they're on your application. So this is typically done through cookie formats. So we will send a username and password to the server. The server will say this has been accepted and send back a cookie. This cookie will then be used to be sent to and from the browser and the server to prove that you've already given your credentials and that you have been authenticated to the server. This essentially prevents you from having to send your username and your password in each request, which is obviously quite dangerous. So with the introduction of these more in-depth technologies, we started seeing vulnerabilities cropping up, and we started seeing a lot of exploits within web applications. So in an effort to try and keep this entertaining for you, I'm just going to discuss a couple of vulnerabilities that I found recently and a little bit of information about them. So one of the most common vulnerabilities, which is also included in the OWASP top 10, I'll mention OWASP in a bit more detail later, is called cross-site scripting. So this happens client-side. Client-side, again, as we said earlier, means that the execution takes place on the browser. So this is a type of vulnerability that isn't affecting the back end of an application. It's not affecting the server. It's directly attacking the users of an application. So the typical attack technique here would be to use JavaScript to actually steal the user's session cookie from the browser, which we do all the time. So cookies are set in the browser, so the JavaScript can access it and send the cookie value back to us, which we can then just replay and get full access to your session straight away. And then typically from here, we'll either try and change your email address so we can request a forgot password, or we'll try and change your password depending on what controls are actually inside the application themselves. So what started happening is people realized that you don't necessarily have to be attacking the server, you can be attacking the user. So a hacking syndicate called Magecart caught track of this and JavaScript/client-side based vulnerabilities very quickly. Magecart stolen millions over the past however many years, and you would have seen a lot of articles about them, including them getting compromising British Airways and a few other big sites. They essentially use third-party scripts or cross-site scripting sort of exploits to lay a keylogger on top of payment portals so that they can send card details back to you. Then from there, they'll probably go on the dark web and actually sell these card details as opposed to trying to use them. So another vulnerability that we see all the time is called SQL injection. This is one of the most destructive vulnerabilities there are in web applications. And if you are vulnerable to it, it means that a user can take any data out of your database that they want. So this is over 20 years old now, and it's actually a bit of a joke that it's still around today, but I'll get into more of my moan about the state of web application security in a moment. So SQL injection is the ability when so say you're logging into an application, it sends a request to the server, to the database. It says, select username from users where user equals, and then your username, right? So that it can say this user and then compare it to the password. So SQL injection is the act of breaking out of the user input that you put in to trick the database into giving you more information. So for example, instead of logging in as admin, I could log in as admin or 1 = 1, and this would get me into the application without even having to type a password. The reason for this is because we passed the OR operator to the command, and 1 always equals 1. So it's saying if this username is correct, or if 1 always equals 1, then allow us access. So it's a really simple, really easy to get through. Password reuse and credential stuffing attacks, as Liam was talking about earlier, is one of the key issues with web application security at the moment. If you sign up to a site, and even if you follow best practice, you have a 50-character password, you have an insane password, you're using password managers for everything, you don't even know your passwords, right? So you think they're as secure as possible, but if that site gets hacked and they then leak those credentials online somewhere else, we can just go and find those credentials and log straight in. So it really doesn't matter on the strength of your password in any way, shape or form. And the reason for this, and the reason that I think we are having these 20-year-old vulnerabilities and not being fixed, is because we're not really training our developers with security in mind when they initially start off their careers. We've had quite a few developers come to us recently who have said that during their training, they were focusing on client-side validation and not server-side. So as we said earlier, client-side on the browser, server-side on the server. If we are registering on an application and they have client-side controls that stop us being able to register a password of less than 10 digits, we can type in a password of 10 digits, capture it in a proxy called Burp Suite that we use, which is an intermediate proxy that sits between the client and the server. And we can then just change that because the client-side requirements have been satisfied. So for example, if you're trying to strip dangerous characters from user input and you're doing that on the client side, all we do is capture the request and then change it again after it's already been filtered. So we really need to really press our developers on the difference between client-side and server-side technology. So are we actually doing anything to try and fix the current state of web application security? Yes. So we have implemented, as a community, multi-factor authentication, API architectures, cookie flags, cookie headers, server response headers. But do people actually use them? No, they really don't. Web applications are typically poorly created at best until they've gone through some couple of rounds of sort of security testing. An example that I can give is that almost every time we test an application for the first time, if it has a file upload facility, it doesn't have antivirus filtering. So there are quite a few people in this call now. I would be willing to eat my sock if every single person said that we have antivirus filtering on all of our web application file uploads, because it's just simply not true. It just doesn't happen. It's an area that's really, really failing us as a community at the moment, is that we're not using the defenses that are put in place. So multi-factor authentication is incredibly important, and this could potentially stop the problem of credential stuffing. This is the art of logging into an application and then having another authentication screen afterwards that will present you with a code or a text message with a number or something. So these need to be treated as passwords, and at the moment they are not. I was in a phishing engagement a while ago for a large pharmaceutical company, and we got one of their directors' credentials through a phishing page with a keylogger on it. We tried logging into their Office 365 and we got rejected because it had multi-factor authentication. So I phoned the person and said that I was from their IT support team. I just said, we're going to send a text message to your phone with the number. Can you just confirm it to confirm your identity to us? And then we can carry on with this conversation. They confirmed it. I talked to them for 5 minutes about some random rubbish that made no sense at all. Just gave them the whole technical speak that, the non-technical staff will just let it float over their head and pretend that they're actually listening to you, which is a very common technique of ours. So yeah, multi-factor authentication. And once I typed the code in and given it to us, we logged into Office 365. From there, we were able to do things like book meeting rooms under his name from a legitimate email to be able to allow us access to their physical premises and so on and so forth. Once you have a trusted account like that, then you're absolutely fine. People will just jump at it and try and help you. So are we actually making any progress? So OWASP is the open source web application security program. They have been categorizing the top 10 vulnerabilities for the last 15 years or so. And if you have some time after this talk, please do go away and have a look at the OWASP top 10 and notice that they almost do not change over the last 15 years. They do shuffle around in severity. Some become more serious than others, or I guess that current threat landscape at that point is more prone to that vulnerability. But you'll notice that it's more or less the same 10 vulnerabilities that have just been chopped up and changed and sort of passed, changed their order in the OWASP top 10. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an understanding about where web applications come from, why we have the problem of insecure web applications, and maybe just a story or two just to scare you into going and checking. And I really hope that any of the CISOs or any of you sort of higher ranking employees here will go and ask your web application development team if you have antivirus on your file upload afterwards, because you'll probably be surprised to find out the answer.
Yeah, cheers, Alex. Just before, thanks for that, mate. Really insightful. Just before I run through some of the questions, you mentioned the British Airways hack and so on. What would you say is the #1 threat at the moment?
So for online payment systems and e-commerce stores, absolutely, it's Magecart Syndicate. Not necessarily Magecart itself, but Magecart style attacks, where they are exploiting things like third-party JavaScript packages. So you are too lazy to write your own JavaScript, or you don't want to because there's no point reinventing the wheel, which is absolutely fair enough. So you use someone else's JavaScript library for functions in your website. Your website's so secure, your perimeter secure, you get 100 pen tests a year, as secure as possible. However, if the third-party site is not secure and they get into the JavaScript library, then they have complete control over your application because they can perform JavaScript functions, or as we were saying earlier, client-side functions that affect the user on your application. Hence why they use the JavaScript to send back card details most of the time.
Right, got you. And is that a threat that everyone needs to be aware of, Alex, or just the bigger companies? Or
Everyone needs to be aware of the threat of client-side attacks and the potential to be able to do it, because people can put this over your login portal, for example, which is really dangerous. But you're most likely going to be targeted with this kind of attack if you are some form of e-commerce store or you allow payments through your system.
Right, got you. And you're just talking, and I wrote something down, and you mentioned that there's various tools out there to make your web app secure that are readily available. You mentioned security headers and what have you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned people aren't using them, but why aren't teams implementing these things? If
developers aren't being told about them at the early enough stage. So I can't say all developers, that's completely incorrect, right? But at least a small sort of portion of them, or I would even say a large majority, but I'd like to say a small portion, are not really thinking about implementing these things correctly, and they're not really researching what they do. And on top of that, if they are implemented, they don't understand how they work and what they do. So for example, one of the most crucial headers is called HSTS, HTTP Tricks Transport Security. This stops sensitive data basically being sent over on encrypted connections. But if your application doesn't even have an encrypted connection set up beforehand, then you might cause issues by implementing the flag. So I think this puts a lot of people off that, you know, there may be negatives that are involved in the security as well. But then it comes down to the whole conversation of usability versus security. And, you know, you have to have your own internal risk assessments to decide, are you willing to have this usability over this risk?
Okay, got you. All right, so I'm just going to fire through some questions here, Alex. I know we're getting on a bit now. So Usman's asked, I think you've answered this one. What is the difference between cross-site scripting and SQL injection? I'm right in understanding that SQL injection is a server-side threat and cross-site scripting is a client-side threat.
Yeah, so cross-site scripting affects the client side, SQL injection affects the server, but the main difference is, I mean, they both come from a similar DNA because the effect of them are unsanitized parameters, except the SQL injection, the unsanitized parameters communicate with the database. Whereas in cross-site scripting, all they do is reflect the data that you're putting into the user input back onto the page.
Right, good stuff. Toby's asked, is there any point doing an unauthenticated web app test?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on what questions you're trying to answer, really. So I would say the first range of testing should be a full authenticated test. So you're coming to us and saying, or you're coming to a pen test company and saying, can you look at our overall security and how we could be hacked? And then when it drops to the unauthenticated tests, the question that you're really trying to answer at this point is, if an attacker that has no information about our application comes along and finds us and decides to attack us, what can they do? So yeah, it is part of a part of a healthy security plan to have unauthenticated tests. But when you do an authenticated test, we'll be testing the unauthenticated section anyway. So you do kind of cover that. So it really depends on the level of security maturity that you're at that moment in time.
Right, good stuff, Alex. So Rebecca's asked, I've got a web application firewall, am I secure?
So web application firewalls are great and they do have their place. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use web application firewalls, but we absolutely should not rely on them. An example of this in the pen testing context is when we actually come to test a website, we ask to be whitelisted through web application firewalls because we want to test the underlying code base of the application for vulnerabilities instead of how well the WAF is blocking our malicious strings. WAFs can be bypassed with enough time, with, you know, if you're sending really slow requests, for example, there are multiple different ways of doing it. So what you really want to be doing is hardening your underlying application and then putting a WAF on top of it for extra security. Good
stuff, Alex. Thank you. So Yusuf asked, what were the best routes going a custom build versus platform build? So I think what you're saying, do I build an application from scratch? Mm-hmm. Or do I use a platform like WordPress or Magento?
So my advice personally would be to build it on a framework or a platform like WordPress or Magento. But that being said, WordPress and Magento have their own vulnerabilities. And because they're such popular platforms, people are constantly trying to hack them, constantly trying to release vulnerabilities, constantly trying to sell vulnerabilities on the dark web. So you need to make sure that you are researching the version of WordPress that you are using at that time to see if there are any vulnerabilities associated to it. And on top of that, remember that all of your WordPress plugins are individual software as well. So you need to check that. And this can be as simple as typing in the version WordPress 4.2.3 exploits, or looking on a site called CVE Details, which is one that we use quite often.
Just out of interest in Alex, when you're running a test, are there any kind of early indicators in the early stage of the test where you might actually think, this platform is going to be insecure? Is any nuggets there that you give the audience, like little flags that they might want to check themselves?
Yeah, so it'll quite often be when people are using WordPress or other CMS softwares, and we go on, and to start off with, we have a look at their robots.txt file. This is a file that instructs web crawlers on what pages they can put on Google or Yahoo or whatever, and what pages they can't. And because of that, they have sensitive data in them. So if we go on and we instantly see /wp-admin/ rmpc. Some of the other calls that they have on WordPress that have just completely blanked from my mind at that point. But we see your WP admin, your admin portal publicly facing, it's in your robots.txt file. We browse to it and we see that you haven't restricted the admin portal to IP address lockdowns. So it's completely publicly available. We know at that point that we can probably brute force to get into your CMS, just depending on how much time we have. So yeah, I'd say during the OSINT stages, you can get a bit of a flavor for what the application is going to be like. In terms of tools that you can actually use, I guess the best thing to do in this case would be to get some kind of web scanner that you'd be able to run yourself. But again, it's not the same as getting a full pen test. So Qualys is a great web scanner. If anyone's actually looking for any particular brands, this is one that we use. We think it's very good. It's quite reliable. But at the same time, it's not going to find any business logic vulnerabilities. All it will find is things like missing flags and cookies that haven't had the correct headers set on them, for example.
Sorry, Alex, to cut you short there. Just going to put this down to 2 or 3 at the most. Yeah. Phil has asked authentication token-based versus cookie. What's the best approach? So I think what Phil's asking is what's the best approach with regards to authenticating a web app?
Yeah, okay. So that's a good question. So cookie-based authentication is typical. That's the normal, I guess, architecture. However, we have seen over the last few years that we are moving we are moving towards token-based and API-tiered architectures. So what this means is essentially you'll log into an application front end, so a GUI, a web application, and it will set your cookies with your normal authentication. And then when you're actually requesting sensitive data from the server, it's quite often using a token. So you log into the GUI with a cookie, and then you request data from the server with some form of JSON web token or bearer token or authorization token of some kind.
Awesome. Okay. Abby's asked, why are applications insecure?
So I guess this touches on what I was saying earlier. The internet was not built with security in mind. This is quite a tall claim to make, but it's not really fit for purpose. The internet was obviously, when it was created, we weren't thinking about security. And all we've done since then is keep patching things instead of creating something new. Because obviously creating a whole new internet is a rather large project. So I would say that the internet is inherently secure and web applications are insecure because of that, as well as not giving developers the correct training.
Good stuff. Final question from Avram. With limited resource, where should I focus my team? Server side or client side?
So as we said earlier, client side requirements can be bypassed so easily. In fact, client side should only be thought of as validation. Client side should not be thought of as being a real way to validate anything. If it's done at the server side, the request can hit the server, but then the server is just going to block it. So server side over client side for validation.
Excellent, Alex. And just before we move on, what one piece of advice can you give the audience, hopefully for free, that will have the most impact?
Implement multi-factor authentication on your login portals that hold any kind of sensitive data within them. It is almost always free. I mean, I haven't personally implemented MFA into an application, but you can use Google Authenticator, you can use text messages. There are so many different options out there now, and it's not costly. I think there's really, really no excuse to be not putting MFA on your high-level privileged accounts anyway.
Good stuff. And just finally, clearly we can tell you're passionate about web application testing. Just keen to understand why you do the job.
So I started, I guess, as an apprentice developer, learning how to build web applications and that kind of thing. At this stage, it made me realize that I absolutely love any kind of technical challenges. Leah mentioned puzzles earlier. That's completely agreed with that. It's like a giant game of Sudoku every day, and it changes every couple of years as well. The technologies move so fast that what we're doing today is going to be completely irrelevant in 2 years, and that's something that excites me quite a lot.
Right, excellent, Alex. Thanks for that insight. So that's great. So just moving on to the final area now. For the webinar, we sent out a survey to the subscription list asking for questions, and what we've done is we've summarised the questions into 2 or 3 categories, if you like. We're just going to work through those, and then we'll close off. So quite a lot of people are asking us about careers. How do we get into pen testing? So I just wondering if either of you had any thoughts on that. What's the best route? What's the most cost-effective route?
Yeah. So from a management point of view, what we're really looking for nowadays with penetration testers is people that can prove that they are genuinely passionate about testing. It's one of those jobs that if you are not passionate about it, it is not a nice job. If you do not like reading code, if you do not like spending hours debugging things, it can be a pretty particularly unpleasant job for you. So it's all about getting your interest in it, researching it yourself, and I would also say trying to bring something slightly different with you to interviews. So for example, web application testing, we follow a methodology of build it, break it, fix it. So for each vulnerability, we build the vulnerable version, then we build the fixed version next to each other, back to back. If we can have people bringing things like this into interviews to prove that they've done that kind of research, it's amazing. On top of that, I know that OSCP is a very common certification that people have been looking at. OSCP is great. It's really personally beneficial for you. It is a tough exam. If you're in the UK and you are becoming a pen tester, another thing to look at potentially doing is CPSA, which is CREST Practitioner Security Analyst. This is a multiple choice exam, so it is a bit easier, and it will also get you halfway to your CREST registered tester status, which in the long run gives you check team leader, which allows you to do government and other kinds of work. And make you really reliable to an organization. So I'd say make sure you're passionate, do your research, and if you can get certs, try and get them, but that does not mean that you have to have certifications to become a pen tester. If you can prove that you know what you're talking about and that you're interested, I'm sure people will be happy to give you a bit of a chance.
Yeah, good stuff, Alex. Thank you. And we had a lot of people asking about the silver bullet question. How do you balance how do you balance security with operational necessity? So,
I'll jump in there. It's a very difficult question because it really depends on what you're doing as a company. So certain companies will need to, well, if I'm talking about kind of stuff you're putting out into the public domain, some companies will need more of that, some companies will need less. Making sure the unfortunate thing about these security things is it's going to slow you down. Like there's no way around that. Whether it's typing in an MFA code, which takes an extra 30 seconds to a minute, or kind of slower, many stages more of authentication, IP restrictions, things like that. It is going to slow users down, and it's being honest with users about that. I think that there's generally a lot of kickback from users when you say, oh, we're implementing 2FA, everyone has to do this, goodbye. And you can come across as a bit of a tyrant, and that's not what anybody wants. You've got to be communicating with your staff about why they're having to do these things. And again, just making sure that there is an internal conversation going on about whether this is necessary or whether it's superfluous.
Just to add on to the previous question as well, our technical director, Gavin Watson, has actually written a Breaking Into Cybersecurity blog that you will be able to find on our Pentest People website. If you have any thoughts at all about that, if you are interested in breaking cybersecurity and becoming a pen tester, then this is probably the best resource that you can read for the moment. So I really advise having a look at that.
Guys, we've had a lot of people asking about remote working. Just wonder if you had any thoughts about
I have a lot of thoughts on remote working. Go on for a while. So remote working solutions out of the box are not secure. It's as simple as that. If you are opening up your RDP servers, remote desktop connection servers, to allow people to come in from home, and you haven't done any configuration to it, then you need to have a meeting and you need to have a look at it, because they are not secure by default. There are things that you have to do for it. You know, this off-the-shelf software, the majority of the time, isn't really off-the-shelf. It's buy the off-the-shelf software, and then you need to get a techie to come in and actually configure it correctly within your network. And then on top of that, it also results in a much wider threat landscape for you, and you need to maintain the software as well. My advice is, if your employees don't need to access the internal networks for any reason whilst they're working remotely, then suffer from the time being and don't give them access. If they do, then make sure all of your connection solutions are completely locked down. You know, we use certificate-based SSH, for example, really strong solutions, as opposed to just grabbing a remote desktop and RDP and opening that up to the public.
Right, excellent, Alex, thanks for that. So we've literally had tons of questions here, so I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get through all of these. So I just want to close off with a common question that we've been asked from the survey. It was really around emerging threats, the emerging landscape. I guess remote access would fit into that, but what are your thoughts, guys, on the emerging?
I presume the rest of that was
focusing.
The big one is going to be phishing. The human threat is always a massive one. It doesn't matter how secure you can make your technologies, people are always going to be the weakest link. I think the line is, don't trust a person if you can trust technology first. So try and trust your technology. Unfortunately, we do have to. Well, fortunately, we do have to let people interact with technology. That's how businesses conduct business, and so it's making sure that you. I think the main threat is the phishing, vishing, credential stuffing, things like that. And the best way to combat that is communication and education.
Excellent, Liam, thanks for that. So I'm afraid that's all we've probably got time for today. I think this has been our first attempt at a webinar, and we've learned a few lessons along the line. We're planning our next one for April, where there'll be more team members. I've realised with the more team members, we've got a bit more resilience if we have illness and what have you. So please look out for the invite. If you're on the distribution list, we'll be inviting you into the April event. It is limited to 100 people, so please subscribe as early as possible. If you have any questions to answer, please use the Q&A or drop us an email at info@pentestpeople.com with the subject of Pentest Crowd. And equally, if you have any discussion topics, we'd love to hear them as well. I hope that's been useful. I hope you've felt that's half an hour, 40 minutes of time well spent, and we look forward to seeing you again. All the best. Stay safe. Stay secure. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.